Hi class, wanted to give you a little bit more information on invasion of privacy beyond what your textbook offers. When we talk about privacy, there's actually 4 ways to invade a person's privacy. There's intruding into a person's private life, there's publishing private facts about a person's life, placing a person in a false light, and misappropriation of a person's name or image for commercial purposes. And we'll talk about each of those. Now, these are 4 different types of invasions, so it's not like libel where there are 4 parts and you have to prove all 4 parts. Each one of these is an invasion of privacy. And like libel, there are, I wouldn't call them defenses as much as considerations. So one is permission. Do you have the person's permission to publish the information or take their picture or videotape them if they're in a private place? Then that kind of leads to the next thing is are they in a public place versus a private place? So, for example, the Pioneer did a story one time on smoking on campus and how the smoke shacks weren't, or as they're sometimes called, the butt huts, weren't very effective in that people were still smoking out in the open. And to illustrate that, they took a picture of a young student who was smoking while talking to a couple of people while they were standing on a sidewalk. And they published that photo, and she came in, she was very angry, and she said, you didn't have my permission to take my photo. And they said, well, we don't need your permission because you were standing out in public at a public institution. So she had no expectation of privacy while standing out in public where everybody could see her and out in public at a public institution. So that would be the third thing. Does the person have a reasonable expectation of privacy? If they're in their home, yes, except for if they're standing in front of their window and they can be seen from a public sidewalk, then no, they don't have an expectation of privacy. But if you had to enter the person's home or enter their private property in order to see through a window, then that they certainly would then have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Just as an example of kind of law versus ethics, I don't know if any of you have had classes from John Simpson, our history instructor, but John is also a professional photojournalist. He's been embedded with the Stryker Brigade several times. He's been to both Afghanistan and Iraq. But he was driving down the street one day on his way to school, and he was just a residential street. And as he was driving, he looked over and he noticed in one of the houses there was a young child with his face up against the window looking out sort of forlornly, like he wanted to go out and play, but it was raining out. So John stopped and he snapped a picture of that. He just thought that was kind of a cute slice of life moment. Now, he could have gone on his way and he could have published that picture because he took that picture from a public street or even from a public sidewalk, and the kid was in full view of the public. Now, again, there's a difference between, do you have a right to do this thing, or is this the right thing to do? Sometimes the two are not the same. And particularly when you're dealing with children, you want to be very, very, very careful. Even if you have a legal right to take their photo and to publish it, there's a whole set of ethical issues involved when you're talking about children. So what he did is he went to the door of the house, rang the doorbell. The child's mother answered. He identified himself, said that he had just taken a picture and would like to publish it in, I think he was looking at the Ranger newspaper. And now you take a chance when you do that. If you offer something, you have to go through with it. You have to honor what you promised. So when he asked the woman if she would mind if he used the child's photo, he was taking a chance that if she said, no, I don't want you to use the photo. Well, I know John Simpson. He would have brought his camera up. He would have pulled that photo up, and he would have showed the woman him deleting the photo so that she would know that it was gone. And he would have honored that if she said, no, I don't want it. But she was cool with it. She said, fine. But that was an ethical thing as opposed to a legal thing. So that child or anybody else standing in front of that window where you're in full view of the public would have no reasonable expectation of privacy. And then also, is it part of a news story? We had a situation a few years ago where a faculty member here had a seizure, and the ambulance came and administered to him and then put him on a gurney and was loading him up in the ambulance when a Pioneer photographer came by and snapped a photo of that. And they published it, and he was very upset. Now, he was not arguing that it was an invasion of privacy. He knew that he was out in a public place. He knew that as a faculty member at a public institution, he's a public figure. But what his argument was that it was unethical because he didn't have any, he was unconscious, is what he said. If you ever got to see the photo, he doesn't look unconscious to me. In fact, he looks like he's interacting with the medics. But either way, it was a news story, and it was out in the open. So in both places, or in all three things here, they didn't need permission because it was in a public place where he had no expectation of privacy, and even more so because it was part of a news story. So those are the considerations sometimes. However, that won't take you, that's not an absolute guarantee. For example, there was a story one time there was a county fair that was going on, and a reporter from the local paper, or I should say a photographer from the local paper, went to the county fair to capture a bunch of photos of what was going on there. And he came across this fun house where when people exited the fun house, they stepped on a grate which blew air up on them. And for women, if they're wearing, like a loose summer dress, it could blow the dress up. And for most people, they kind of laughed it off. Well, the photographer waited there, and he waited for a young, attractive woman wearing just the right dress to step out. And sure enough, it blew her dress up above her head. And he took a photograph of her in her underwear. And that was published, and she sued for invasion of privacy. Now, she's in a public place. She's at, a county fair. She's definitely out in public. So she has no reasonable expectation of privacy. And they argued the photo was part of a news story coverage of the fair. However, the jury found in favor of the woman because what they said was, you can't really use this argument that it's part of a news story because you had scores of photos of the fair. Any one of them you could have used that would have equally illustrated the activities at the fair. You didn't have to use this photo, and you purposely chose it. So in that particular case, even though you would think the law was on the side of the individual, of the photographer, in this case, the jury said, your arguments are pretty hollow, and we feel like you embarrassed this woman needlessly. So she won her privacy case. So these are some of the considerations. I'm going to do a second follow-up video here and talking a little bit more about these 4 types of invasion of privacy. So I'm going to cut this one here and go on to the next one.